first. I would think the palace was a bigger structure than his own. Building temple furniture and then bringing in the ark. And we talked about last time that the ark was the only thing that wasn't redone as far as the temple stuff. Dedication of the temple, the prayer, and all that's always a wonderful passages to read through and to read all the details to the prayer and such. And then he was building other cities, and then he created a navy. We didn't really notice that, but he went with Hiram and some people who knew the sea. And so from Israel down to Ezion-Geber, which is right at the point of the Red Sea, that they had a harbor there. And so that's where he built the ships. Okay, and so now we'll look at, in chapter 10, his fame and his wealth. Sort of summarizes all of that. So what did God promise Solomon back in chapter 3, verse 11 through 13? So let's just jump back there. Excuse me. And someone like to read those for us, 1 Kings 3, 11 through 13. Okay, Brother Don.
God said unto him, because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that thou shalt not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days.
Okay, so he just, God says, okay, you focused on me, you focused on doing my will in your position as kingship, and so I'm gonna give what you've asked for, discernment and understanding, a heart of wisdom, and then I'm also going to add to that riches and honor, and so we see some of that fulfilled, as God said it started to be fulfilled right away, but we'll see that in this passage a little more. As we go through here, I think it's helpful to think about what God's communicating, what the Spirit of God is, I think, trying to communicate in chapter 10, especially after the visit with the Queen of Sheba. So I'll talk about it when we get there. Okay, so I was just thinking, well, I'm going to get there, but so let's look at this part first. So the visit with from the Queen of Sheba. What is connected with Solomon's fame in verse number 1? I thought this was an interesting statement. Yeah, the name of the Lord. And so she heard the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord. And so what his honor he is receiving, that somehow it was broadcast beyond Israel's borders, that this is connected with what God's doing. And I thought that, that's a wonderful testimony, I think, for Solomon, for the kingdom at this time. Okay, things do change, as we'll see. But at that time, that was what it was. And so that should be, I've always said that, when you, as far as, like a triangle and a person at the top, that their influence is much greater than someone who's at the bottom. And there's a sense in which that he at the top his connection was with the Lord, and that was going where his name went, so the Lord's name went. And so I think that needs to be for us as well. Did you have, yes?
Wouldn't that be true for basically every nation? They all had gods that they thought were their gods that took care of them, and then basically made it so that they were successful, or again, and then comparing them against other nations' gods. If they lost, then they thought that their other god was
Right.
at that time. So it would have been. I can understand why that some would not consider, even though they see what's happening, why they, even though some would say, "Oh, he's the best god," like we've seen several times, but then others would say, "Well, just right now, he's better."
Yeah, that's true. And that we saw that with David and Goliath. That was part of the battle, that defeating Goliath was defeating their God. And so, yes, I think there is an aspect to that. And so there's a truth to that, and that's why it gets really confusing as we go into chapter 11 as far as what was being promoted by his name. But yeah, that's good. And that's I when you're talking about that, I remember what was it? All of a sudden I'm lost in his name. The phrase that were down in Brazil for many years. I remember when he was here and he was talking about, because he had started like 10, 11 churches down there in Brazil. And one thing he said about the people in Brazil, that they will not come visit your church assembly unless you have a church building. And I think maybe part of that was a Catholic mentality with it, but he said that's how it is. You have to have a building for the people there, or they're not going to come. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, so that was just an interesting scenario with that. But yeah, so God put that in there for us to remember that there was a testimony involved in that. So how did this meeting go between, and we just read it, so you don't have to read it again, but how did the meeting go between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba? Yeah, she was happy. All that everything she had a question about that he was able to answer. So we have no idea what the questions were. It does say prove him with hard questions. So maybe some riddles and some things that she had learned or what she had heard or what she had been taught in her country. And so just whatever she asked, he was able to answer that. So I think that was an interesting scenario there. When told of Solomon's wisdom and wealth while in her home country, and we didn't get down here, what was the queen's thoughts there in 6 and 7? Especially, I guess it mentions it in verse 6. Yeah, she didn't believe. She said, "No way. That can't be so. There is not a single individual who can be that wise and that wealthy." And as it said in verse 4 and 5, that when she saw everything going on and the way things were organized and just the glory and the brilliance and all of that was there, that there was no spirit in her. And then she just comes up and she says, "Boy, I heard about everything, and it's better. It's better than I thought." And that's interesting there. I was going to add something else. I don't remember. So his wisdom and his wealth were beyond what she had thought at first. What did she say about Solomon's servants, and then why? There in verse number 8. Yeah, they were blessed, and I like the King James Version there. It's the same word blessed elsewhere, but happy are thy men, and happy are these thy servants. What principle, what can we learn? I'll ask this again a little later, but what can we learn from that when we think of him who is wiser than Solomon and greater than Solomon? I think that principle there is, who is wiser than Solomon who walked this world? Yeah, well, God in the person of, Christ, okay? And as we'll look at that passage a little later, but a greater than Solomon is here. Your joy and your blessing is going to come as you stand continually before him and hear his wisdom. That's where the joy of your Christian life is listening to the Lord and being under his counsel, his direction, spending time with him. So I think that's just a great verse for that. So any other thoughts with that? So again, that they were blessed, and the why was because they stood before him and heard his wisdom. She just thought, wow, and I'm sure we know several places that Solomon, wasn't as wise as he should have been. So she takes that picture of what she's heard and what she's seen, as she says a little bit earlier, and so all of that just impressed her tremendously about, let's see what she's is impressed by. So who receives the credit for the impression she had of Solomon? Yeah, the Lord. So let's read that. Rick, would you read verse 9 for us?
Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighted thee to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore made he thee king to do judgment and justice. Okay. So again, that comes back to what, verse 1 says. Concerning the name of the Lord. And so she's not just impressed with the fact, she sees somehow God's personal involvement in Solomon's life, says, which delighteth in thee. And the Lord loved Israel, and therefore you are the king to fulfill. So she probably saw, I don't know all that she saw there, but I would think as she came, she wasn't just staying for 15 minutes and leaving.
She probably stayed there for several weeks. And so as she saw everything that was mentioned up there in 4 and 5, I'm sure some of that had to do with people coming to him for decisions to be made as far as his kingdom. So she was apparently right there and saw that he... there's one thing to have something built and something organized and all of that, but apparently she saw a little bit more, and it says that his ascent by which he went up into the house of the Lord, the end of verse 5. And so there was an aspect there of maybe the pomp and circumstance of a king going into worship, but obviously there was a worship aspect to that, going into God's house. So all of that was something that she was impressed with, and she was impressed with his God. And I think that's really important for us to see and understand. Any other thoughts there? Okay. So I don't remember now why I was asking this. Like I said, I lost some of my notes from this, and it got, I don't know what happened to them. Because I had some things in there gone. I don't remember. It sort of gave a little bit of that away, but I yes. Yeah, go ahead.
That because he had founded the kingdom and had lived for God, and everything was about him originally, I think that's the reason why that impression was there.
Yeah.
He kept that obviously going because it was 13 years of building the temple.
Right. Well, it was 7 in the temple and 13 in his house. And so this has been, I think that the point is this has been 20 years down the road. Now, he reigned for 40 is the final statement about his life is. But yeah, so he's been living for the Lord. And so remember, though we'll see here, Solomon takes a turn the wrong direction. But up to this time, he's living for the Lord. And I think this speaks of his personal testimony and his love for Christ and our love for the Lord and his situation. Any other thoughts there? Okay. So what else was I? So her gifts in verse 10, it's interesting when you add them up and calculate it out there, that she gave the king 120 talents of gold and of spices, very great store, and precious stones. So the 4.5 may have just referred, it could be the talents of gold, and then in addition to that, the spices and precious stones, or that could be all the weight altogether. There came no such abundance of spices as these which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. I'm not sure if, how much the gold was. Well, it does say 120, and I don't know if it's all 3 of those, but I mean, we're talking about lots and lots, okay? I mean, this was not, so she did not come, so we have to keep in mind, she didn't come by herself. She came with a whole caravan of people and stuff and bodyguards and all that kind of stuff was there. So yeah, this was a pretty magnificent trip on her side of coming up. And some people was in southern Arabia is where we'd say it today. So yeah, it came quite a ways with a lot that was there. What did the queen take with her when she left in verse 13? Yeah, so gifts from Solomon. And so I would think maybe some of that, it says of his royal bounty. So there may have been an aspect of a treaty with them, together in this situation as well. So there was lots of good things happened there with Solomon, the Queen of Sheba. So we'll leave it at that. Any other thoughts in addition to that with her and her visit? Okay, so let's go there and look what Jesus said about the Queen of Sheba. There is a reference to her in Jesus' ministry. So Matthew chapter 12 and verse number 9. So Matthew 12. Someone like to read these verses for us? 12, 9 through 12. Okay, Don. That's not, sorry, that's not the one. No, it's not your fault. I made a wrong reference. Not sure what I did. Sorry. Let me see if it's not, it may not even be in chapter 12. I wonder if I was in chapter 11. Let me see. Is it 12:9 or 11:9? Ah. Matthew 11:31? Oh, you're over in Luke. Wow, okay. So let's start. Let's start in 38 and go down through 42.
Then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to thee, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment for this generation, and shall condemn it. But they repented at the preaching of Jonas, and behold, a greater than Jonas is here. The queen of the south shall rise up in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here.
Okay, so they're coming, they're looking for a sign, and Jesus says, you guys are an evil, sinful, adulterous. You don't have your relationship with God what it should be, and that's why you're seeking a sign. So then he mentions about Jonah as a sign. And then I think it's interesting in verse 41, because when Jonah came preaching, the men of Nineveh repented. So he says, the men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they responded to Jonah, and you're not responding to me. Okay, it was really what because a greater than Jonas is here. A greater than Jonah is preaching to you, and you're not listening to him. And then verse number 42, and the queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation. It's almost as if she will also be held accountable for her life, but what she will do there is that she'll condemn that generation that Jesus is preaching to, for she came from the uttermost parts. In other words, she traveled a long way to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and these people had Jesus right there in their streets, in their midst, and they weren't listening to him, and he was greater than Solomon. So he's really taking Old Testament illustrations of people that went, especially Queen of Sheba, a long way to hear what God has to say, and through Solomon, and now Jesus is there, and they don't even want to travel across the street. It is amazing of people who know the Lord, and they don't want to be where God's people are being fed and God's people are being taught, and we always have other things that get in our way. You know that. I'm looking at you guys. I know you're faithful here. You wouldn't be here this morning if you weren't. But there's others that could be. And one day God says, you know what? I'm gonna hold you accountable for how you want to be influenced by the wisdom of God through His Word. And so we need to take heed to those things. Any other thoughts with that? Is that the Luke passage? Is it Luke 12? I know you were looking up something there.
Luke 11:31.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I was off all the way. Both.
It's just 42.
Oh, okay. I was probably looking at both of them at the same time, and then I got one and not the other. So the wealth of the king of Israel, obviously speaking of Solomon. And so all through here, I don't remember so back there in 1 Kings, I did count it, but I don't remember the exact number. But gold and gold and gold and gold and gold is mentioned many, many times. And there's no, we could say, well, here was the beginning of the downfall of Solomon because he had all these riches. Well, it doesn't really say that here. It's saying this is what God had promised, and look what God did. And so if we look at it in the way, okay, is God fulfilling what he said he would do? He did. He said, I'm going to make you the wealthiest person in the world. And so this chapter 10 is really focusing on that. And so it begins, verse 14. Now the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents. And so a talent anywhere from 70 to 100 pounds. And so they said that yearly he had 25 tons of gold. I wonder where that would fit in with. Uh-huh.
Guess where that was at? The Philippines.
Oh, really?
Because they traced it down because a lot of Philippines have Hebrew names
Oh, that's neat.
in their background.
Okay.
And that's how they found out. They tried to trace other countries and didn't know where Philippines the only one they come to.
Huh. Well, that's pretty cool. So he was God's telling us this. This is wow. That God was blessing. God was doing what He said. So He made some decorative shields. I call them decorative. The reason is that He put them in a certain place, and so they seem to have been brought out during festivities or honorary ceremonies, those type of things. Gold is probably not the best metal for fighting in a battle. Why? Yeah, it's soft. So you take a spear to go right through a gold shield. I'm sure it was something on top of it and probably overlaid, but nonetheless, the shields, the 200 were, they measuring it out, this is from someone else's calculations, but 7.5 pounds each, and then the 300, which were, so those were probably body shields, the bigger type, and then the other ones were smaller, and they were 3 and a quarter or 3/4 a pound each. And so again, it's almost like you think, I had so much that He didn't know what to do with it. Let's just make some decorative shields and we'll bring them out for our ceremonies. So I mean, it would have been pretty fascinating to see something where they brought, 302, we got 500 soldiers all lined up with their special shields. It was like the Queen of Sheba. It was impressive. I remember the first time I went to had my brother-in-law through my wife's side, that he was Army, and he was getting some medals that he had won, some honorary type of stuff. And so I'd never been, so as we came upon the base, the first thing I noticed was the entry guard as cars came by. And he was very, upright, and, a car came by, and he would salute some cars and not salute others. I guess there's a bumper sticker or something if it's a general or something. And so he would salute them as they came by, and then he would very much particular, he would be very, robotic almost about where you turn, where you go. And I go, wow, that's pretty cool. And then we went there, and the color guard and everything in the ceremony was just, to the point, to the T on. Everything was just timed perfectly, and I was awesomely impressed with what they did and how everybody conducted themselves. And I think that would have been something that Solomon put together. And yes.
On the bumper, sometimes they have little flags right there. You know exactly who they are.
Right, that's what I was thinking, that there was, because I asked my brother-in-law a little bit later. I said, how did he know, and what was he doing? And he said, and he said there's something on the bumper that says who they are and such, and their rank and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So anyway, that's pretty impressive. He also constructed an elaborate throne of wood and ivory and gold with 14. So he had a throne that was elevated up. And then on each side of his throne, there was apparently life-size lions. And then there was 6 steps that went down, and they must have been large enough where there was a lion on each one of those. So we've got 14 lions all together. And he said there was no throne like that anywhere else that had ever been made, and probably ever would be made. But yeah, it was pretty awesome with that. Yeah, so I'm not sure how that all fit together, whether there was I put wood. The wood is not mentioned, but I don't think it says overlaid the gold on top of the ivory. I don't think it probably had ivory and then gold somewhere, so it probably could, I don't think you'd go to the elaborate of putting ivory on it and then covering it up. So I think it was probably both and made that way. And I don't think of something that large of that whole structure that it wouldn't be solid gold in the sense, because it's too big and it wouldn't hold up well. So structure underneath, and then the gold and ivory was there. And then what, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, but what did they say about the drinking cups in Solomon's? Yeah, they're made of gold, and it's interesting as well. Later on, it talks about in I didn't mark down the verse there, but the silver was considered nothing special. We don't need the silver because we've got so much gold. So pretty awesome situation with all of that. So I mentioned that he made all his drinking glasses of gold. So no other king had the wealth and wisdom of Solomon, but where did it come from? Verse 23 says, so Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom, just like God said would happen. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God put in his heart. And he said that, I think, back there in chapter 3 as well, that I'm going to put this in your heart. And so God did, and God got the credit. And again, all of that. So I would think that during that time that Solomon often spoke about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so those type of things that I think he gave glory to God, and so people recognize that. Now, and when it says that all the earth sought for Solomon, and so verse 25, what did people bring when they came? If you came to be with the king, just like, yeah. Yeah, so really what Queen of Sheba brought, in order to get entrance. And if you're a representative of a kingdom, well, you brought the best of your kingdom as you came to see King Solomon. So everything just kept piling up, and it says the same rate year by year. And so things were just, continuing to be extravagant. I don't know how else you could say it. So then we come to, I backtrack just a little, Solomon's downfall. What do you see when you compare Deuteronomy 17:16? So let's go back there. So if you want to hold your place here in 1 Kings 10, but look back there, Deuteronomy 17 and verse 16, and then 1 Kings 10:26. So who'd like to read 1 Kings 10:26? So we can just read it out for us, and then we'll read it together. So the 1 Kings 10:26, someone like to? Okay, Brother Krinky. And then who'd like to read Deuteronomy 17 and verse 16? Hopefully I got these verses right. Okay, Steve. So, Brother Krinky, why don't you read yours first, and then Steve, if you'll just jump in there and read after. Okay, and then 17:16, which is when Israel has a king later on. This was one of the stipulations as far as him ruling.
But he shall not multiply horses to himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt. In the end, he should multiply horses, for as much the Lord hath said unto you, you shall henceforth return no more that way.
Okay, and what he meant by is don't return anymore back to Egypt. So there seems to be as I asked there the question, you just noticed that back in Deuteronomy 17, he says, hey, don't multiply horses, and it seems though Solomon's multiplying horses. But yet in the chapter there's no condemnation. It is in the next chapter, definitely, but he doesn't mention anything about the horses. Maybe one of the reasons I say this, if you jump down to verse 28 of 1 Kings 10, we'll read a little further in Deuteronomy 17 in just a moment. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt and linen yarn, and the king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. And a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. And so far all the kings, all the kings of the Hittites and for the kings of Syria did they bring them out by their means. Someone had suggested the horses and those chariots were really, really, really expensive. And so they were saying that these were not war chariots, but probably, honorary chariots in the sense of, parades and so forth whenever the king was going somewhere. And apparently, the way it's stated in verse 29, that the chariots, that he got them out of Egypt and then sold them somewhere else. And so there seems to be that because Israel's where it was located, that Solomon became a tradesman. And he'd get stuff from the north and he'd send it down south and get stuff from the south and send it, of course he's the middleman, marks everything up and making money that way. I'm not sure. But it does, I would say that there was something here that was opening up a crack where Solomon's loyalty and commitment to God was fracturing just a little bit. So I would see, because he is multiplying the horses, and chariots and all that, and putting them through the cities and so forth. So I think that his chariots for himself were probably military, grade chariots in verse 26. So I think there's an opening there. Let's, and I'll open it up for comment here in just a moment. But the next one there, Deuteronomy. So Steve, if you're still in Deuteronomy 17 there, if you would read verse 17, and then someone will jump down to verse number 1 of chapter 11 of 1 Kings. So, Brother Krinky, would you read that one? I'll let you read that second. Steve, why don't you read 17:17 first?
Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold.
Okay, so it's interesting. Wives and the silver and gold, though the silver and gold was something God had given him, it just seems like that was not something he was striving for. So, chapter 11, verse 1. Okay, so what do you see? You see that Solomon's messing up. And I just thought Solomon violated the written revelation of God and seemed to pay no attention to the warning, which we'll look at in just a moment. Let's read verse 2, and then I'll say if anybody has a comment, we'll go through. So verse 2 of 1 Kings 11 says, of the nations concerning which the Lord, so he mentions all those different nations and the wives that he loved. And of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. So he wasn't, it's almost, I don't know if the time you can get so wise that you're no earthly good, and he lost his concept. Hey, I am still under the authority of God. And what God has written in his word is still for me, and I need to follow it. And so again, he was putting something else in front of that. And what's the warning he did not heed, which shows it was fulfilled in just a little bit? What's the warning in verse number 2 where he's quoting there from Exodus? Right, don't do that because... Yeah, turn away your heart. And that's, the next verse says that very thing. So he had 700 wives, princes, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Yes, sir.
It's interesting to me that I don't see any reference to the nation. It's all about him. Now, his servants were happy. It says so. But what about the other 1 million or 2 million people? How did they benefit from all of this wisdom and wealth that Solomon received? It doesn't say anything there about him ministering to his people.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
We don't know, I understand. But
Right.
it's just interesting to me that there would be no reference. It's like he's totally about himself. So he had all that wisdom, but I think he lost track of something.
Yeah, as we get it, and it does, the Queen of Sheba, when she says this, and I think this would be, some people would say, well, that was just her opinion. Well, that's true, but at the same time, it is revealing to us what was happening. And she did say that the Lord loved Israel forever because he put you in that place. We do know that there was an aspect where he put foreigners, the old Canaanites, put them in slave labor to build all this stuff, and he didn't do that with Israel, and so he put them in places of leadership. So I don't know if that would be part of that, but yeah, so yes.
I think the Rehoboam, when he became king, and what the Jeroboam asked him to do to reduce the taxes.
Oh, Rehoboam, you're talking about Solomon's son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just that whole thought of, okay, and then maybe that was more toward the end of his reign as opposed to at the beginning, but just that whole idea. And then you do have to mention the merchants, how they benefited certainly. And then if somebody's going to buy them, it's going to be, well, it could be the Israelites, it may not be. As far as the linen, he would bring these linens and he'd sell them to the merchants, and the merchants obviously were selling them something they couldn't get anywhere else.
Right, right.
So now who was buying them? I don't know. It could have been people who were traveling through.
That I don't know. I would think that well, I won't, unless stated, I would take it that there was a benefit for beyond just Solomon, though that is the focus. If we can find where he begins to speak, or which we do, the Lord very clearly says some things here that says, Solomon, you are out of line, which we'll see that. So let's read verse 4. Let's read 4 through 6, and we'll just read through part of this here, because I don't have any more notes because the notes beyond here were lost. So let's read that. Someone read 4 through 6 for us. Okay, Don.
For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart.
Now, let me stop that just a second. So notice that it does say when Solomon was old. Now, I don't know what old means. It depends always your perspective on that. But yes, so there is an aspect here, okay, he's getting up in years, okay?
That his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father.
Okay, so twice it mentions David. You're not doing like David, your father. You're not doing like David had taught you and showed you. Some of the things here, the Zidonians, Ashtaroth, there were some, lack of a better term, sexual rituals that were involved in that. And then Milcom, I believe that's the same one as, now I forgot, Molech, which they had child sacrifices where they'd burn their kids in the, red hot statues, metal statues, and so forth. So, this is really, it's not just bad, this is horrible. And maybe the end of verse 3 where it says he turned his heart away, that is almost like he's turning away from the Lord, but then verse number 4 says, and it turned unto these other gods. And so Solomon his heart was no longer perfect. His heart was not complete where it should have been fully given to God. And so he's losing his dedication to the Lord. And all of these things are showing up. And then as it says there in verse number 6, he did evil. He just started down the wrong road. So so in verse 7, he built the high places. Likewise, it says, and likewise did he to all his strange wives. There's hundreds of them. And burn incense and sacrifice unto their gods. So someone made this suggestion. I don't know if this is totally true, but each one of these, if they were princesses of different countries or regions who married for some kind of treaty or some kind of treaty or connection with those countries, that they probably came with their priests or priestesses. They came with, a queen did not come to a new kingdom by herself. So now you've got, and the queen or a king would not necessarily be the one involved in lighting the incense or making the sacrifice. And so they've got people doing that for them. And I just thought, wow, the whole thing is just a mess. And, it was really, I don't remember where it's at, and I didn't look it up. I think it's called, isn't that called the Hill of Abomination somewhere else? Maybe it's in the Chronicles, where this hill that Solomon had made outside of Jerusalem. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Yeah. So let me just read verse 9. And the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned from the Lord his God, from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded him. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee and give it unto thy servant. Notwithstanding in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. Howbeit, I will not rend it away. I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe unto thy son for David my servant's sake and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. Everything's, God says, Solomon, I'm not doing anything good for your sake because you have messed things up, but I'm still I promised David some things, and so I'm going to continue to have the kingdom of Judah will continue. But it's just, I guess for us, there is a great lesson here. Now, though we hadn't had a personal appearance of God, like is mentioned to Solomon twice, but we have the Word of God. We have the Spirit of God. We have so much more. You remember with Jesus said, he was talking about John the Baptist, there's none greater than him, but he that is in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. What he's talking about there is the privilege that you and I, that the people of that day, now that Jesus has come, are so far beyond what was in the Old Testament. And I'm thinking, Jesus said to the apostles, there have been people longing to hear what you're hearing, and they never heard it, but you guys are hearing it. See, we are like the apostles. We are like the people in the kingdom of heaven. Our advantage over all of that is so much greater. And God says, are you going to follow me? Because if you don't, I got to deal with you. Remember, Peter said, if judgment starts at the house of God, how much greater it will be for those outside of the household of God. But so God's going to send some opposition here. Let me just, so he sends, there's three oppositions. You can go back through there. One of them was Hadad, who was an Edomite. Another one was Rezin, who was up in Syria and started an invading band and then became king up in that area. And then Jeroboam was one of Solomon's officials that Solomon hired to be head over the tribe of Ephraim in the building projects, because Solomon saw, man, this guy is good. He's organized. He's a good leader, and so I'm going to make him that. And then there was a prophet that came to Jeroboam and said, you know what, Jeroboam? I'm going to allow you to rule over 10 of the tribes. And so Solomon heard about that, and he wanted to kill Jeroboam. And so Jeroboam fled, and he came back right after Solomon's death. But all of those were opposition that God raised up. Now, I want you to notice, and we'll maybe close with this. Go back to 1 Samuel chapter 7. 1 Samuel chapter 7. Or 2 Samuel, I'm sorry. 2 Samuel is where God makes the covenant with David. So I want you to see something that God says there. So 2 Samuel 7 and verse number 12. It says, and when thy days are fulfilled, so 2 Samuel 7 verse 12, and here the Lord speaking to David, and when thy days are fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. So there is an aspect there both of his, Solomon and the descendants, but also ultimately, as we'll see here in a moment, ultimately the Messiah. And he shall build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So that's again pointing toward Christ. And I will be his father, and he shall be my son. Now notice this. If he commit iniquity, there's Solomon. If he committed iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Solomon, whom I put away before thee. And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. So some of those are pointing to the Messiah. But just that thought in verse 14. If your sons commit iniquity, you know how I'm going to chasten them? I'm going to chasten them through the rod of men. In other words, I'm going to use people to somehow deal with that. And that's what God did with Solomon as he turned away, as he raised up these opposition to start harassing and bringing difficulty to his kingdom. So just just note that God fulfilled his word in every way, both the promises and the blessing. And in the middle of the difficulty Solomon was facing, God was still going to fulfill what he said to David. Just the wisdom of God, how he works both judgment and mercy, both blessing and correction, all at the same time. and I'm glad God's in charge, and he always will be. And so we have one greater than Solomon who has come, and we follow him. I'll just stop there. So next week we'll sort of summarize all that we've gone through in the Kings, and just look at, there's something better ahead, speaking of Christ. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, well, let's go ahead and close in prayer. Father, thank you for your love to us, and